Hello, hello. I'm your co host for today, Dr. Carrie Jones, and I am so excited as I have on Dr. Stacy Sims. She is a pioneering exercise physiologist and nutrition scientist, absolutely transforming exercise nutrition and performance for women. According to her, if you work out, you're an athlete. And guess what? You need to listen up. She has groundbreaking work on female athletic health, sex differences between training nutrition, men and women, and she even talked about at the end what she's doing with menstrual fluid. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but imagine being able to collect menstrual blood and determine things like endometriosis, PCOS, or HPV. Today, though, we heavily focus on the perimenopausal transition and the postmenopausal woman. How should you train or work out? How much protein do you really need? And does that change as you become late stage perimenopausal or postmenopausal? And what's the deal with intermittent fasting at this time? Dr. Sims tells us all. So listen up. Dr. Stacy Sims, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast. I am so excited to have you here. And for those of you who are watching on video, you will see I have one of her books propped up behind me because I'm such a big fan.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have heard you say, I know your mission is to help women better understand their bodies, elevate them in research, science, sport, and ultimately in life. So I want to start this off with a bang. Give women what they're asking for, which is the majority of our audience. What is the most important thing listeners need to know about the perimenopausal transition, given all your research and expertise? I feel like we get asked this a lot, and it is an area of discussion you cover a lot. And it's a lot of women are confused right now in life. So hit us up.
Yeah, it is very changeable, and every woman's experience is different, and it can change almost every month, if not every day. But the one current underneath that everyone needs to understand is every woman who's ever had a menstrual cycle will go through it. And it is not about a deficiency of hormones, it's about ovarian function winding down because we're not reproducing. So what we need to do is we need to find some kind of external stress that is going to create an adaptive response within the body to support our bodies the way it used to when we had our hormones working for us. So that's how I kind of approach it. It's like, okay, our body is really plastic in the fact that it can adapt to many different stresses. So let's find some good stress to add to the body so that we can keep progressing in life and having longevity without having the auspice of you're aging out and having all that negative conversation that happens with peri and postmenopause.
And I think that's how women feel. I think when I see in the comments, when I see in the DMs, when I listen to women, they feel like they're aging out. They've been given that message. They feel like their body is failing them. They're very confused because the topic of this perimenopausal transition was not popular until probably in the last year. And now it's a whole movement. So I love that you've framed it like that. And we're talking about this.
Yeah, because I mean, first it was people didn't want to talk about menstrual cycle and periods and active women, right? And so we finally were able to blow that tabooness. It's still around, but for the most part, over the past 4 or 5 years. And then we're seeing people who've always been active and now they're experiencing a whole bunch of issues within their own fitness journey. And they're like, what's going on? So these are the coaches of the athletes who are experiencing menstrual cycle problems. And now they're like, hey, wait, now what about me? So in my bubble of really active women, it's been a topic of contention for so long because you look at age categories for sport and you'll see 40 plus. But if you're looking at someone who's 40 versus someone that's 50, it's completely different ballgame of capacity unless you're aware of what's going on. Whereas the difference between a 40-year-old man and a 50-year-old man is not as great when we're talking about body composition and physical activity capacity as when we start to see this definitive aging point in women that no one wanted to talk about. But now we're like, you know what? We're going to talk about it. And we're going to take the power back to us as women and find solutions. Because when you look at the research, it's always a very sick, sedentary, obese, postmenopausal woman that they're doing the research on, because that ends up the biggest drain on the healthcare system. But all of this massive population of active women who are like, hey, what about us? How do we approach this? What do we need to know? So you're getting all this information from a clinical scope that isn't appropriate for this population. So that's kind of the mission of, yeah, okay, all of us that are already healthy and doing this stuff, what do we need to change to make ourselves keep being healthy and being able to progress in what we want to do?
So let's start with that. What do we do? What do we change? How do you guide this start of life, right?
Yeah, I'm a physiologist, and so I tried to explain it from like the cellular mechanisms that are happening. So when we're looking at what estrogen specifically does in the body, and we see how tightly tied it is to muscle function, muscle quality, anti-inflammatory properties, I'm like, okay, well, if we're looking at it from a muscle and a bone standpoint, and we know that we're losing estrogen, and the first thing that a lot of women complain about is the loss of strength and lack of speed. And it's because we're looking at estrogen and how it encourages faster muscle conduction and firing patterns and lean mass development. So when we lose estrogen, we have to turn to a different stress. And so we look at central nervous system. How do we stimulate the central nervous system to have the feedback to create a fast muscle contraction, to create a strong muscle contraction, and to keep feeding the idea that we need lean mass? Oh, resistance training, but it has to be a heavy load, because light loads and high repetition is a metabolic stress. It's not a central nervous system stress. So we start talking about resistance training, and women are like, oh, yeah, well, I do body weight stuff. I do air squats, or I go do 10 to 15 reps 3 times a week. It's like, that's not what we're talking about here, because that is not a strong enough stress to create these adaptive responses we want with the central nervous system. So we start getting people understanding what power-based training is, what that load is, how that really encompasses us being able to stimulate more power and more strength and more lean mass development. Then we look from a metabolic scope, and we hear all this conversation about do zone 2 because it improves our metabolic flexibility. Women are already metabolically flexible by the fact of being born an XX. We look at mitochondrial function, we look at mitochondrial respiration. We are far and superior above men when we're looking at how our mitochondrial functions. So we don't have to spend the time in zone to improve our ability to increase free fatty acid use. I'm talking an active population. When we start looking at a sedentary population, there is a time and a place for zone 2, because we need to encourage what we already have. But in an active population, we want to do high intensity work to produce lactate, because we start to lose those fast twitch fibers with age. Women have less to begin with, and we want to be able to develop lactate, which is the byproduct of that high intensity work, because it's a preferred fuel for the brain. And if we're looking at attenuating dementia, looking at attenuating onset of Alzheimer's, we know that there's a sex difference in brain metabolism, and lactate is one of those key contention points. So not only is doing that high intensity work really good for brain health, but we also see that it creates an epigenetic change within the skeletal muscle to increase free fatty acid uptake, to increase the body's ability to pull carbohydrate in and store it and use it, which then decreases esterified free fatty acids circulating, which we know is part of the reason why women's cholesterol goes up and why we get increase in visceral fat. So by doing that high intensity interval training type work, we're creating a whole cascade of adaptive responses that reduces visceral fat, that improves our mitochondria, respiration, and ability to use fuels effectively, increases our BDNF and our lactate production for our brain. And if we're doing super high intensity work, then it creates an epigenetic response to improve insulin sensitivity just by the nature of changing the way the muscle fibers understand what carbohydrate is. So again, we're looking from that physiological perspective of all the things that estrogen does. We can do that through different applications of exercise stress to improve overall responses and adaptation in the body. Just takes a bit of work. So when we see women who are in their late 30s, early 40s, and they're doing all the stuff, and they're like, we're not getting any change, I don't understand. And unfortunately, often the answer is, I'm going to try fasted training, or I'm going to cut my calories and increase my training. And it backfires because then they get into low energy availability, low carbohydrate, they're not hitting the intensities they need to. So it's a whole quagmire of things that is counterproductive. Yeah. So I'll take a breath because that was a lot of information. Just went.
No, and I appreciate that. And this is really good. The zone 2 training is a question of mine. It comes up a lot and it comes up for men, and it's in a lot of popular male podcasts. So I see it in the comments. Women are repeating it. No hate, just male versus female. They're like, yep, I do my zone 2. The other thing, I love that you said the central nervous system stress and stimulation, because I see a lot of lightweight Pilates. No hate against Pilates, but you're saying it's the heavy that we're looking for the central nervous system changes. Is that correct?
Correct. So if we're looking at what's the bedrock, what is the bread and butter, right? We're looking at the bread and butter right now. Of course, people love Pilates. They want to include Pilates, or they want to go on their zone 2 hike or run with friends. Yeah, but we don't want to make that the mainstay of what we're doing. We want to look at 3 times a week heavy resistance training with 2 sprint interval sessions and maybe 1 little bit lower intensity, high intensity interval session. So that becomes a bedrock. And then we can pepper it with some other things, but we're looking at quality over quantity at all the things that we're doing now.
And is sprint interval training your blanket suggestion for women who are looking to get that HIIT in?
So when we're looking at HIIT, there are the 2 different levels, right? So we look at sprint interval training, that is that 30 seconds or less. That's the top end. We might be able to do 3 or 4 of those type of intervals really well. And the recovery is long because we're looking at 3 minutes between each of those 30 seconds. Not only is that for our energy regeneration in the muscle, but again, it's another central nervous system regeneration. So we need that recovery. If we're taking it a step down and doing a high intensity interval session, then this is more metabolic, where we're looking at 1 to 4 minute intervals with 1 to 4 minute recovery between those. And so if you're looking at a CrossFit-esque or a boot camp type class, and then that would be like every minute on the minute you're doing something, and then the 5th minute you're full recovery and you do maybe 3 rounds of it. But it's not a lot of time, it's the quality. So if you get to the 3rd round, you're like, I can't hit the same reps, then you stop, right? Because we don't want to fall into the volume. So when we're looking at those 2, then yes, but it takes time to learn how to sprint. And this is the thing where people are like, I can't sprint. It's like, well, you don't have to do running sprints, because I don't want you to pull a hamstring. I teach women how to get that top end on the assault bike. So you have to use your arms and your legs at the same time and go as hard as you can. Or on the rowing machine where we're chasing meters. It's like, how many meters can you get in 30 seconds, right? And then recover, and we're going to try to do a few more the next time to really teach women how to push, because in our generation, we haven't really been taught how to push that top end unless you've been in an athletic world, because we've come from the Jane Fonda fat burning zone, low intensity, all that kind of stuff, right? So now teaching women how to push and go hard is a learning curve that a lot of women kind of struggle with until they actually start to see the benefit. So when we're talking about, it's like, I don't want people to go start lifting heavy after they hear this. I want people to understand it takes time to learn to lift heavy properly. So if you're already doing the higher reps, then yeah, we're going to start looking at how your body moves, mobility. Then we start adding load. It might take 6 months to a year to learn how to do 3 heavy reps properly without injury. I really want people to understand this isn't a training block. This is what we're doing for the rest of our lives, because we see evidence of women average age 87 doing power-based stuff, relative, of course, and increasing strength and lean mass and bone. So it's never too late to start, but we want to make sure that we're starting it well, because it's a longevity training path, not a short training block for body composition.
Oh, hear to that. And I think that's a big message also that I'm seeing on social media, in your trainings, your books, the other books and trainings that are out there, of it's not just hot flashes and night sweats. It's not just about insomnia. This is health span, right? Health span over lifespan. This is the rest of our life. These are the big things we're trying to work against: cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, diseases of frailty. And while the hot flashes and night sweats are important and annoying, and right, 2 things can be true at the same time. And I want you to be able to be in your 80s, able to lift your suitcase, able to lift your great grandchildren, and not have to worry. And I think that mind shift is slowly starting to happen for women. And I'm so happy about it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Okay. One of the other things you mentioned is working out and fasting. I see that a lot.
Yeah, I do too. I was just on Mindy Pelez's podcast. She wrote Fast Like a Girl because she has all these people who are asking about fasting. And I was like, look, my lane is active women. And then there's a time and a place for specific types of fasting in the general population who is not active. When we're looking at the active woman, fasting is counterintuitive because one, we look at using free fatty acids. And if we're already having a little bit of difficulty with free fatty acids and we don't want visceral fat, then we don't want to have a time period where we're producing a lot of free fatty acids and ketones because it's not a preferred fuel right now. We want to look at brain signaling. As a physiologist, I look at what's happening in the brain and how the brain is signaling the body for adaptation, for appetite control, for endocrine. And if we are not eating enough, or we go and try to do a heavy exercise stress without fuel, the brain perceives it as a threat. And that threat then is translated into let's turn our thyroid down, let's increase our cortisol, let's create this whole system that is not what we are after. So when we talk about not doing fasted training, it's not eating a full meal before you go do a resistance class. It's maybe 30 grams of carb with 10 grams or 15 grams of protein before you go do a HIIT session, and 15 grams of protein before you do resistance training. And then you have your real meal after that. And that little bit of nutrition coming in signals the hypothalamus that, yeah, there's some nutrition here. We can take on this exercise stress. We don't have to freak out. And then we are also able to hit those high intensities and actually hit them well instead of the perception of us hitting it and not really hitting it. Because if you are fasted, everything feels more difficult. But the reality of the physiology is you're still not hitting those metrics you want to without fuel. So fueling is really important. And then we can talk strategically about, okay, well, if we do chronobiology where we eat something within a half an hour when we wake up to help drop cortisol, and then we go through the day fueling for life and stress, and then we stop eating when we finish dinner, and then you have that overnight time and improves sleep. You're not going to have any body composition change without really good quality sleep. And then we're fueling for when our body needs the fuel during stress. So people call it intermittent fasting. I call it regular eating or working with chronobiology, but both of them are very important to understand. There's these little nuances within it, especially if you're an active woman.
My gosh. And when it comes to protein, where do you fall on the protein spectrum for women? What is your suggested? Because, of course, we're seeing quite the gamut now on social media, and it's very confusing.
So when I look at the research and look at women and aging, we know that women and men become more anabolically resistant to exercise and protein. So when we're looking at some of the signaling responses, which is why we have protein after exercise, we know that a 20-gram dose doesn't do anything for women. Premenopausal women need around 35 grams post-exercise to get muscle protein synthesis. When we're looking at women who are peri and post-menopause, it's 40 grams of high leucine content protein. And then when we're looking across the board at protein intake, I always need to remind people that the RDA is the least amount you need to eat to prevent malnutrition. That is not appropriate for someone who's trying to change body composition and build lean mass and keep being lively and have energy. So when we're looking specifically at what women need, our premenopausal women need about 1.6 grams to 2 grams per kilo. So that's around that 0.8 to 1.0 grams per pound. And when we get into late peri and postmenopause, we're looking at that 1 to 1.2 grams per pound, or that 2 to 2.3 grams per kilo across the day. So it's a higher intake. People freak out and they're like, I don't know if I can eat all that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can, because I'm not talking just animal products. I'm talking, you can look at all the nuts and seeds and sprouted grain breads, and peas and edamame, and everything has a bit of protein, and we can bring it all together and really have a high protein and good quality diet without the over reliance on too many animal products or protein supplementation. It's just we haven't been conditioned to thinking about protein because we've gone through the social stigma of high fat, high carb, low carb, and protein hasn't been in the conversation.
But boy, is it now.
It is now. It is now. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you recommend women, at least when they're getting started with this, when they're hearing this equation of, especially if they're late perimenopausal to fully postmenopausal, 1 gram per pound of protein, to start tracking, really start evaluating, don't just assume you're getting enough, but like, let's see if you're getting enough. And that can help them understand protein across the different forms.
Yeah, I find tracking and visualization. So I tell people, you know what? Palm size is about 20 to 25 grams of protein. So if you're looking at palm size bit of protein, you want palm and a half size for every meal, and you want palm and fingers post exercise. So if you're getting that palm and a half size for every meal, it doesn't have to just be palm sized chicken. You can look, okay, I have some edamame here, I have some quinoa here, I have some seeds here. And so when you start adding it all up, you're like, oh yeah, okay, great. That's easy to visualize. And so we're tracking, I first have people start doing like the visualization with their palm, and then they can really nail it in, because once they start getting the habit and the pattern of looking at the food and seeing how much from that visualization they have, then they can really nail it in when they start tracking specifically. I'm not a huge macro fan with regards to tracking because I find it creates too much stress and can cause some disassociation with food and appetite. So I really try to get people to understand like what a plate looks like and what needs to go where, rather than weighing and really looking at macros.
And then 2 questions. What are your thoughts on protein powder? And what are your thoughts on amino acids? Since you mentioned leucine heavy proteins, when people use their pre-workout with amino acids, how do you feel?
So we know that if you're using essential amino acids and you can put them in your drink while you're exercising, it helps delay fatigue a bit. It also helps bring up the amount of amino acids that are circulating, but it's not the ideal solution. When we're looking at protein powders, it's a good way of getting good high quality protein in quickly. I just really try to have women not rely on it all the time. So if you're having a serving of protein powder after training every day, that's fine. But if you're starting to reach for protein powder for every meal, then we have a little bit of an issue, because there's lots of availability of real food. We're looking at protein supplementation just as that, as supplementation. If you're vegan or plant-based and you're looking at using a pea protein isolate, then this is where we look at adding some essential amino acids just to boost the amount of leucine that's in that serving of pea protein isolate. Because if we're looking at a 30-gram scoop of pea protein isolate, that's about the same amount of leucine as a 20-gram scoop of whey protein. And we need 30 to 40 grams of that whey post-exercise. So we just need to boost the amount of leucine that's in that pea protein. So yeah, there's a time and a place for it, like I said, but we don't want to rely 100% on that all the time.
Okay. What about creatine? What are your thoughts on creatine in women?
I love it. When you start digging into the research on creatine, it has that stigma of being bodybuilder supplement. But we start looking at it from a health perspective. There's a whole website devoted to creatine for longevity and health. So it's creatine for health. And women have 70 to 80% of the stores that men have. And it's important for brain health, heart health, gut health, as well as muscle performance. And as we're getting older and we're having less and less quality in our tissues, if we're supplementing with creatine, we see that it helps with a lot of the mood swings and mood issues that women with perimenopause have. Also improves muscle function. If we are maintaining our muscle function, then we're able to keep strong and keep our lean mass going. So that also helps with soft tissue injuries. So it's something that people kind of go, oh, I don't want to take creatine, it's for bodybuilders. But I look at it from a health perspective. It's the most studied supplement. And it's really good for overall health. I mean, we're even looking at it in pregnant women and supplementing clean creatine monohydrate in pregnant women because it's such a high energetic, and pregnancy takes so much energy to complete. So it's safe, but you want to make sure you get CreaPure, which is a water hydrolysis type production rather than just creatine, which is often from China and it's an acid wash to create it. So people were having side effects with creatine. I really have them look, are you using CreaPure, which is a German company and a German patent that uses a water-based wash? Or are you just using one of the cheapest creatines you can find? Because then that's an acid base, and that's what causes a lot of the side effects.
And is there a dose range you find women should be looking at?
We aim to get women up to 3 to 5 grams a day. So that's like a half a teaspoon at the most. And if we start with maybe 1 gram and work our way up to the 5 grams over maybe 2 months, then it really does help eliminate any of the worries or the bloat that comes with some women who start creatine, because water retention is one of the side effects. And it takes a saturation point in order for you to really feel a difference. So it takes about 3 weeks of that 3 to 5 gram mark to really saturate the body and get all of the effects. So if we start small and work our way up over the course of 2 months, you just start getting that saturation without any of the side effects that some people talk about.
And does it matter if you take it morning, noon, night, food, exercise, fasting?
Nope, just take it. I'm the kind of person who's like, okay, my morning coffee, there's some creatine, there's some adaptogens, there's a little bit of protein. I'm like, yep, good to go right before training. Done and dusted.
I love that. All right, I do want to go back for a second because we do get this question a lot. What about the perimenopausal women who are kind of all over the place? So they're not in the early stages, they're not in the late stages. They're like, I get a period, I skip a period, I get hot flashes, then they go away. Like, how do I focus on my training, protein, etc., to optimize in this wild time?
Yeah, because the body is so changeable at this time, I tell women, look, what we want to focus on are primarily the 3 big rocks. One, we want to nail down sleep, and sleep can be very elusive at this time. But if we are not having really good sleep hygiene and looking at maybe using some theanine or apigen, or in some of the states where it's legal, maybe some CBD gummies to really help get into good quality sleep, then everything else is for naught. So the first big rock is nailing sleep. Then the second one is physical and mental movement. So we're looking at what kind of training we're doing, as well as looking at using what we call a sessional rating of perceived exertion. So if you have an interval session on your calendar for that day, but you wake up and you have absolutely no energy and you feel awful, then you go to the gym and you start, maybe you feel better, maybe you don't. If you don't, then stop and use it as a mobility recovery technique day. That's fine, because we're in it for the long game. We're not in it for a short period of time. So this is where the physical and mental really come into play. Because if we're understanding how our body is responding and we're able to apply a sessional rating of perceived exertion, then we can get more out of our training. So even in resistance training, I often tell women, we want to go in, and if we feel really good, then we want to work each set to what we call 2 reps in reserve. So that means you can do 5 reps, and the last 2 you could possibly do with a really good form, but you don't. So that's around 80% 1 rep max. But we can't do 1 rep max all the time because our body's all over the place. And then the last big rock is nutrition. So this is where we're looking at taking care of our body. We're eating a wide variety of fruit and veg, fibrous foods, taking care of the gut microbiome, getting our good protein, but also understanding that life comes into play. So we follow an 80-20 rule for food too, right? So 20% of it's life, where you want the whiskey or the wine or the dark chocolate or the cake, whatever it is. And 80% of the time we're on target. And then there's that 20% where we can manipulate. You're still not getting a lot of change, then maybe we bring it down to a 90-10 rule. But I would never drop that 10%, because no one can be on it for 100% of the time. It's not fun. It's not sustainable. And we're in it, like I said, for the long game. So if we hit those 3 big rocks, then that's what people really can like hold on to, that becomes a stability factor through all these changeable times. And if you look at it, okay, for 3 weeks, I'm going to focus on sleep. And that's the thing I'm focusing in these crazy times right now. Then after those 3 weeks, I'm going to start focusing on the physical and mental. And then you nail that new habit down. And then you can say, okay, now I'm going to dial into the nutrition. So you have control of these things that are going to help change your body, help change everything that's going on that you perceive against you. It's going to better it, but it's not everything all at once. And it gives you control in this whole massive changeable time.
Amazing. Okay. And then that leads me to the final wrap up. Let's talk research. Where do you see research? What are you doing in research with women right now?
I'm on the other end, actually, where we are looking at menstrual fluid, because we're finding that there's so much tabooness around your period and the menstrual fluid loss, but it is a massive amount of data that can give us insight into what is happening each month for a woman. So we are looking at it right now. I'm in the lab being able to find markers for PCOS, for endometriosis, for HPV. So if we're understanding, quantifying that, we're also quantifying heavy menstrual bleed, because these are the things that women don't know. So if we're able to educate and create at-home kits or give more information to doctors without overrunning them, then that leads forward to, we see this data. Now, how does that impact perimenopause? And how does it impact late perimenopause into postmenopause? On the end of the spectrum of postmenopause, I'm looking at early versus late postmenopause to see dosing of resistance training and high intensity work. Because in early postmenopause, we still are a bit receptive to some of the estrone and estradiol, and we're able to bank that into some of the training that we're doing. But as we get into late postmenopause, so that's the 8 to 10 years past menopause, we need more doses of high intensity more often, but lower volume, because we need that stimulus more often. So we're trying to quantify that end of things too.
This is amazing. I'm so, first of all, honored that you came on the podcast today, and two, that you just dropped a million bombs of knowledge and you're continuing with all the research. I'm so fascinated to see what happens with the menstrual fluid, because yes, why isn't that studied? I'm sure that's a ton of information.
Yeah. When you first talk about it, people are like, and then you explain, they're like, oh, what a great idea. And I mean, we've done focus groups across ethnicities, and everyone's like, yeah, I'd rather give you samples from a menstrual cup than give you my arm for you to take venous blood. It just seems more sensible. And so the more it becomes discussed, the less ick factor I think people really acknowledge. So if it's hard, why not?
I love it. Well, where can people find you? Where do you want people to go besides the book that's behind me? Tell everyone how they find Dr. Stacy Sims.
Most of the stuff that we're doing is on the Dr. Stacy Sims website. So that's just drstacysims.com. But for ongoing information, I post on Instagram and Facebook, if you're still using Facebook, a little bit on TikTok. I have a great social media team that keeps that stuff going. But the real ethos is that I'm not biased in the fact that I want the information to get out. So we don't have an agenda. We're just putting out the information for people to learn. And if they have more questions, ask us and we'll get that information out to you. So yeah, those are the places.
Amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you again so much for coming on the Root Cause Medicine podcast. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun. And I'm glad that we can spread knowledge and keep empowering women.
Absolutely.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.